first lesson that we'll talk about on the front is something called triangle inequality theorem, and it is very, very straightforward. Okay, there's 3 parts of the theorem that we need to talk about. The first one says if 2 sides of a triangle are not congruent, meaning the 2 sides just aren't equal to each other, then the larger angle lies opposite the larger side. Okay, one thing you need to make note of: lowercase letters are sides. Okay, your lowercase letters are your sides, your uppercase letters are your angles. So these letters in orange right here, those are your sides. The uppercase letters, those are your angles. Okay? So what this is saying is if side B is larger than side A, then angle B is going to be larger than angle A. That's all that's saying. So if side B is larger than side A, then angle B is going to be larger than angle A. Alright? The opposite is also true. If 2 angles of a triangle are not congruent, then the longer side lies opposite the larger angle. So if angle B is larger than angle A, then side B is larger than side A. Okay, that's all that's saying. And then the bulk of the lesson, triangle inequality theorem. So that says the sum of the lengths of any 2 sides of a triangle is greater than the length of the third side. If that's true, then I could say this is a triangle. So essentially what this is saying is I can't say that any 3 numbers, if I put them together, it's going to create a triangle. That's not necessarily the case. It has to fit into the specific criteria. So essentially what I do is I take my 2 shorter sides, if I add them together, and that sum is greater than the larger side, it's a triangle. Okay, but it's got to be greater than. So for example, if I have 2 sides, 15 and 15, add them together, my largest side is 30. Is 30 greater than 30? No. Okay, so if that happens, then it's not a triangle. Okay, if I had 15 plus 16 though, so take my 2 short sides and add it together, is it greater than my larger side? 15 plus 16 is 31. 31 is greater than 30. Those 3 sides add up to make a triangle. Okay, so that's all it's saying. Take your 2 shorter sides, add them together. If the sum is larger than the largest side, it's a triangle. If it's not larger, then it's not a triangle. That's all that's saying. Okay? Alright, so what we're going to do for these first 2 problems, so for this first one we are listing the angles from least to greatest, but all we were given was the sides. Okay? Remember that the side, or the angle that you're looking for is opposite the side. Okay? So for example, side NP is really side N because it is opposite angle N. Do we see that? What I mean by opposite, like across from? So if angle N is over here, that makes this side lowercase n. Okay? So this side that's 18, what's the name of it? P. Okay? Lowercase p because it is opposite angle P. And then of course that makes side P N lowercase n because it's opposite angle N. Okay. So now from here, given the sides, we're going to list the angles from least to greatest. Okay? Which side is smallest? N. Okay, so that means angle N is going to be the smallest. Okay? If side N is the smallest, that angle that's across from it has to be the smallest. So that's angle N. You can also kind of see that in the picture, although I don't want you to guess. Okay, always have a reason behind it. I know some of us, when we don't know, we're just like, oh, well, the picture looks like this. Trust me, I get it. I did that when I was in your shoes, when I took geometry in high school. Trust me, I get it. But you got to have a reason behind what you're doing. Okay, you can't just say, well, it looks like maybe the smallest. You can use that to help you do process of elimination, but don't let that be your one-all, this is why I'm doing that. All right, so what does that make? Which angle is next smallest? N. Okay, so N, side N is the next smallest side. So that means angle M is next, and then of course that leaves us with P. Okay. Does that make sense? So sides correspond with the angle opposite the side. Okay. All right. Now for number 2, we're going the other way. We're given the angles, we need to figure out the sides. Okay? But before we do that, notice I've only got 2 angles in this triangle. How can I figure out the third? Add them up and subtract from 180, exactly. Angles inside a triangle add up to 180 degrees. So 50 plus 62, I believe that's what, 112? 180 minus 112? 68. So that missing angle right there is 68 degrees. 50 plus 62, subtract 180 from it. Alright, let's label our sides real quick. Okay, so let's start off with angle L. Name the side using 2 letters that's going to be named side L. KN, yeah, KN. Okay, let's see. What side is going to be labeled K? LM, yep. Or ML, whatever you decide, and then that leaves us with this side being M. Okay? So now from here, we're given the angles, we need to list the sides from least to greatest. And just like with the other problem, so for example here, the smallest angle is going to correspond with the smallest side. Okay? So which side, K, L, or M, is smallest? Which angle smallest? L. So that means side L is going to be smallest. Angle L is 50 degrees, that means the side L has to be 50 degrees, or has to be the smallest. Okay, which side's next? M. Angle M is 62 degrees, that's the second smallest, that means side M has to be the second smallest. And then of course that leaves K as last. Alright, any questions on that? Now it's your time to ask. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I'm looking at the sides, okay, or from least to greatest. So, but in order to figure out notice that I don't have any sides numbers. So I have to use the angles to help me out, just like over here. All I was given was sides, I had to figure out the angles. And essentially the smallest side corresponds with the smallest angle, or vice versa. The smallest angle corresponds with the smallest side. Other questions? Alright, now let's use triangle inequality theorem. Alright, so triangle inequality theorem says take your 2 shorter sides, add them together. If that sum is larger than the largest side, it's a triangle. Okay. So which 2 numbers do I need to add together for this first problem? 19 and 18, good, the 2 shorter sides. So you need to ask yourself, is 18 plus 19 greater than 40? No. What is 18 plus 19? 37. Okay, 37 is not greater than 40. So is this a triangle? No. Alright, can you very quickly do the next one? Confident you can add. Take your 2 shorter sides, add them together, see if it's greater than the larger side. It can't be greater than or equal. It has to be greater. Alright, which 2 sides am I adding for the second one? 33 and 37. Is that greater than 66? What is 33 plus 37? 70. 70 is greater than 66. So yes, those 3 sides, I can put them together and it will create a triangle. And for this last one, I want you to try this one on your own. Just very quickly go through each choice. You're asked which of the following sets could not represent the 3 sides of a triangle. Okay, so that means triangle inequality theorem fails. Okay, so take just a minute, work through each of those, figure out which one does not work. So you're doing just what we just did. Take the two shorter sides, add them together. If it's greater than the larger side, it works. You're looking for the one that fails. Okay, which one fails? B, good. 4 plus 9 is 13, which is not greater than 14. Good. Okay, that's less than 4.1. Are there any questions? As long as you can remember, two shorter sides added together has to be greater than the larger side. And as long as you can do this, you're good. Okay? Alright, next lesson. Coming back to Pythagorean theorem, okay? We talked about it briefly when we did distance, but now we're going to focus a little more on it, alright? So Pythagorean theorem, that's what I told my students last semester. If you leave this class with anything, it's that you know Pythagorean theorem and you know how to work with it, okay? If you don't leave with anything else, but you can at least do Pythagorean theorem, alright? So Pythagorean theorem says if a triangle is a right triangle, so it has to be a right triangle. You can't use this with any other triangle. It has to be right. Then the sum of the squares of the length of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay? Also remember that your hypotenuse, we talked about this last week, your hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. Okay? And then, of course, these are your legs. So if you need to make note of that, feel free. Okay, your hypotenuse is always across from or opposite of that right angle. It is the largest side. The largest side is always your hypotenuse. Alright, the converse, or the opposite, is always true as well. If a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then I can say that this triangle that I have is a right triangle. Okay, if the Pythagorean theorem fails, it's just not a right triangle. It can still be a triangle and it not be a right triangle. Okay? Alright, so number one. Find the missing sides. Oh, before we do that, remember that with Pythagorean theorem, your hypotenuse is always your C. Okay? Your legs can be A or B, but your hypotenuse must be C. Okay? Alright, now for number one. I need to find the missing side length. Okay? The Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Which side am I looking for, A, B, or C? C. Okay, the hypotenuse. I'm looking for my hypotenuse. That is always C. Okay. You can also see that angle C is going to be opposite of side C. Okay, so I can say that 15, that's opposite A, and 12 is opposite B. Okay, from here, simply plug everything in. I like to call it plug and chug. Plug it all in. Alright, so A squared, A is 15, so that is 15 squared, plus B squared, so that's 12 squared, equals C squared. Alright, and then remember when you're squaring something, you're just multiplying it by itself. Alright, so what is 15 squared? 225. Plus 12 squared, we should all know that. 144 equals C squared. Okay, remember the goal is to get C all by itself. I don't want just C squared. I want C. Because I want to figure out the side of this triangle that I'm missing. Alright, what is 225 plus 144? What is it, 369? Okay, 369. And then what is the opposite of squaring something? How am I going to get C all alone? Square root. Okay, square root. So I need to square root both sides. Okay, on your homework, which you'll get to work on today and tomorrow in class, some of the Pythagorean theorem problems ask you to leave it in simplest radical form. So we're going to have to remember how to do that. And then some of them ask you to round. So decimal. Okay, we're going to do both. Alright, So the first thing you need to do is, I'll just go ahead and tell you, spoiler alert, 369 is not a perfect square. Okay? So we need to figure out the largest perfect square that goes into it. So that means we need to remember our perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, so on and so forth. Okay, so what I want you to do real quick is see if any of those go into 369. Okay? 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. See if any of those go into 369. Gotta know your perfect squares. One's obviously going to, but that's not going to help. Nine does? Anything more? Remember, don't just stop at 9. Anything else? I don't think so either. Alright, so 9 is our largest. 9 times what? 41. Okay? So when I break that apart, square root of 9 times the square root of 41. Okay, what is the square root of 9? 3. And square root of 41, I can't do anything with. So 3 times the square root of 41 is my answer in simplest radical form. Okay? Now I also need a decimal just for practice because it does ask you for decimals in your homework. So you can either type in square root of 369 or 3 times the square root of 41. They're the same thing. This one's just simplified. And then if you hit those arrows right above enter, it should give you a decimal. Round to 2 decimal places for me, please. If you get a radical, hit the arrows right above enter. What do we get? 19.21. 19.21. So depending on how the problem asks you, your answer could be 3 square root of 41 or 19.21. All right. Hit the arrows right above that. Alright. All good on this process. We're going to do a few more problems, so don't worry. Alright, number 2. Okay, am I looking for the hypotenuse or leg? Leg, okay, leg. I'm just waiting for people to be more confident. Yes, you're looking for a leg, okay? 10 is your hypotenuse. That's opposite your right angle, okay? So that means I'm looking for A or B. Which one do you want to look for, A or B? B. Let's look for B, okay? So that means this missing side is B. Which side is C? 10 or 7? 10. And then we'll just say 7 is A. Alright? So, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That's still my formula regardless. Yes, Molly.
How did you figure out that B
As long as it's not C. Okay? C is my longer side across from the right angle. So I could have said that this was A. As long as it's not C. Alright? So now let's plug everything in. A is 7. 7 squared plus B squared, that's what I'm looking for, equals 10 squared. Alright. What is 7 squared? 49. 49 plus B squared equals what's 10 squared? 100. Alright, remember the goal is to get B all by itself. But in order to get B by itself, I need B squared by itself. So how do I get this 49 to the other side? Subtract it. Yes, subtract it. What is 100 minus 49? 51. So B squared is 51. And lastly, how do I get B all by itself? Square root. Okay? Go through really quickly. Make sure there are no perfect squares, or if there is. You need to do that process every time, because I need to see if this can reduce. So 1, 4, 9, 16, I would stop at 25. See if any of those go into 51. Any work? Okay. So if this were asking you to leave it in radical form, your answer would just be the square root of 51. Because there's nothing else I can do with it. That's as simplified as it gets. But go ahead and find a decimal for me just for practice and round it once again to 2 decimal places. So type in square root of 51 and then hit those 2 arrows right above enter. So B is approximately 7.14. Good. 7.14. Perfect. So just be careful on your delta math. Be sure you read the instructions. If it says rounding, it wants a decimal. If it says radical, it wants a square root. Okay? If you do one or the other, even though your answer is right, but you didn't put in the right thing, it's just going to mark it wrong. Okay? All right. With those around you, I would like you to try number 3. Okay? Try number 3. And I'll give you a hint. This number is fairly large. See if it's a perfect square. Check and see if it reduces. So you'll type in square root of whatever. See if it reduces. Because you're not going to know off the top of your head. Am I looking for A, B, or C? C. Good. You're looking for C. Alright, what I mean by check and see if it's a perfect square or not is when you get your answer, simply type in square root of that answer. Okay, I want you to see if it reduces perfectly. Spoiler alert, it does. It's just obviously not going to be a perfect square either. So that's the first thing you need to do when you have a big number like that. Just simply type square root of whatever, see if it works. Then, if it doesn't work, you can start your process of checking for other things. Second. Just gotta hit 3 buttons first. Alright, what do we get for our answer? 41, good, 41, okay? So you're looking for C. So that means both sides can be A or B, doesn't matter. So 9 squared plus 40 squared is C squared. That's 81 plus 1600. So you get c squared is 1681, and then when you take the square root of that, that's actually a perfect square. It reduces to 41. But I have units here, so I need to say 41 centimeters. Okay, be sure you have that centimeters. If you're provided units, give units in your answer, okay? The other two, we weren't provided units, so no need. But I was told that this is in centimeters, so my answer needs to be in centimeters, okay? All good so far? Just a few more problems, and then you're free to do as you wish. Well, you have homework, but if you get it done, then you got nothing to do tomorrow. Alright. These next two problems, they look intimidating, but it's really just like two-step Pythagorean theorem, okay? So for problems 4 and 5, or I'm still asked to find the missing side. So for number 4, I'm asked to find x, okay? Clearly, in order to find x, I need this side, and let's just call it y. Something other than x. Okay? But notice that I've got two right triangles. So once I find this side using this triangle, I can use it to find that side, right? So you're just doing Pythagorean theorem twice. Okay? So for this triangle right here, I have two sides, I'm looking for that side y. Is y, for that triangle I just colored in, is it a leg or a hypotenuse? Hypotenuse, okay? It is opposite the right angle. Alright, so that's my quote-unquote y. Okay, so let's start off with that triangle first. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, so that means the other two sides can be a or b, it doesn't matter. So we'll just say that 8 is a, 4 is b, and then my c is my y. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. That's that missing side. Alright, 8 squared is 64. 4 squared, 16 equals y squared. Alright, don't get too far ahead of me just yet. What is 64 plus 16? 80. Okay, so 80 is y squared, and you will see why in just a moment. I'm going to say y is just the square root of 80. Okay, we're not going to reduce it, and you'll see why in just a second. Okay, so this missing side right here is the square root of 80. Alright, now I need to do Pythagorean theorem again to figure out x. So let's think about this. Y that I just found, is that a leg or a hypotenuse? A leg. Okay, for the second triangle, that's a leg. My hypotenuse is what? X. Okay? So, say a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Again, we'll say that the square root of 80 is a, and you're going to see why I did that in just a second. B squared is that other side, which is 7, and then x squared is my hypotenuse. Alright, now let me explain why I didn't reduce this thing. Okay, squares and square roots are inverse operations. They're going to cancel each other out. Okay, so what I want you to do real fast in your calculator, open up parentheses, type in square root of 80, close that parentheses, and then square that. So hit x squared, and then hit enter. So open a parentheses, type in square root of 80, close that parentheses, and then square that value. And what do you get? 80. Okay, so what's happening here is the square and the square root are just canceling each other out. Alright, so that's why I didn't go and reduce it. So when I take the square root of 80 and square it, the square and the square root are canceling each other out. I'm just left with 80. Yeah, Molly. Open a parenthesis. Oh, you didn't square it. So square root of 80. Square that.
Oh.
Just hit that square. Okay, does that make sense why I didn't reduce that? Because if you reduce it, then you don't automatically see that that just goes to 80. If you went and reduced it and then squared that value, you still should get 80. Okay, but that's just a little shortcut. And that should have squared. Alright, what is 7 squared? 49. That equals x squared. Now we can finish this thing. What is 80 plus 49? 129. Square root both sides. And for this one, let's just do decimal. So take the square root of this thing, turn it into a decimal. And 2 decimal places. So x is approximately 36 or 37. 36. What's the decimals? 35. So that means it rounds up to 36. Yeah, that means it rounds up to 36. Okay. Okay. All good? Let's keep chugging along. We're almost there. Alright, so for this problem, I'm asked to find the missing pieces. Okay? So notice that for this triangle right here, I've got 2 pieces. I can easily figure out this third piece, right? This piece right here, leg or hypotenuse? The hypotenuse, okay? Crossing the right angle. So that's going to be what? It's going to be a C. Okay? I'm just going to call it Y. Okay? Yeah, that's a hypotenuse. Okay? So, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Plug it all in. Okay, so say a is 3, b is 4, and my hypotenuse is about y. Alright, I want you very quickly to figure out y. Alright, so what's y? Just find y. Just find y for it now. 5. We get 5. Okay, so 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. So you get 25, which is a perfect square. So when I square root both sides, y is 5. Okay, so y is 5. Alright? How is that going to help me? Because now for this triangle on the right, I've only got 5.
So,
Okay, what shape is this right here? That entire thing. It's a rectangle, right? This entire thing's a rectangle. Okay? So if this side is 7, the side across from it has to also be 7, right? Okay, we haven't talked about rectangles, but we should know that the opposite sides of the rectangle are congruent to each other. So that side's 7. Okay? You could also say that this side up here is 5. Right? Whatever you want. And whichever triangle you're working with, this dotted line, leg or hypotenuse. Hypotenuse, okay? I'm just going to call it x. Okay? It's a hypotenuse. So what I want you to do really quickly, figure out the length of x. And round to 2 decimal places for the decimal. Don't worry about the radical. Okay, so your legs are 7 and 5. Okay, that's x squared. You need to square root that. 8.60, good. 8.60, very good. Good deal. Questions on, yes, Milo.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Got it?
Yeah, I see.
Good deal. Other questions before we talk about the converse really fast? Yeah.
Why did you do what we did last time? The 80?
Because that came out to be perfect. Yeah, that came out to be just 5. Okay, if it were square root of 5, then you could do that. Okay, but that came out to just be plain old 5. So because of that, we don't have to worry about that. If it came out with the square root, then you can do what we did last problem. Okay, good question. Any other questions? Alright, let me remind you what the converse is real fast. So the converse of the Pythagorean theorem essentially is going the other way. Okay, so if the Pythagorean theorem works, so if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, so that means if the two legs, if I square them, it equals the hypotenuse squared, then the triangle is a right triangle. So we're just going the other way with it. With all the other problems we've done so far, we were told that it's a right triangle, so Pythagorean theorem should work. Now we're going the other way. If Pythagorean theorem works, then the triangle I'm asked about is a right triangle. Okay? So, I'm given this triangle right here, and I'm asked to determine if it's a right triangle or not. Okay? I gave a problem similar to this on last semester's test, so there's a good chance it could be on this test. Just because there's no right angle mark does not mean it's a right triangle. Doesn't mean it's not a right triangle. Okay, you're trying to show that it is or isn't. Okay, so don't put that as an answer. Okay, you're trying to use the converse of the Pythagorean theorem to show whether or not this is a right triangle or not. Okay, so I need to ask myself, when I take my two legs and square them and add them together, does it equal the hypotenuse squared? Okay, which side is going to be my hypotenuse? Which number? 37. Okay, your largest side is always your hypotenuse. Write that down if you need to. Your largest side, I'll write it down too. Your largest side is always the hypotenuse, which is your C. Okay? Your largest side is always your hypotenuse, your C value. Okay, so that's your 37. Okay, the others can be A or B. Alright, so we'll say 35 is A, it doesn't matter, and 12 is B. So you need to ask yourself, does 35 squared plus 12 squared equal 37 squared? If it does, it's a right triangle. If it doesn't, it's not a right triangle. Okay, so what is 35 squared? Good, 1225. And we know that 12 squared is 144. What is 37 squared? Good. 1369. So now you need to ask yourself, does 1225 plus 144 equal 1369? Yes. Okay. So, because the left-hand side equals the right-hand side, this is a right triangle. Okay, and you're also asked to explain your answer. Okay, so a quick explanation. We use the converse of the Pythagorean theorem to help us out. Okay, so we can say by the converse of the Pythagorean theorem, I'm just going to abbreviate, by the converse of the Pythagorean theorem, since a squared plus b squared equals c squared, this is a right triangle. So since a squared plus b squared equals c squared, triangle MNO is a right triangle. done. So, hint, hint, if there's a question like this on your test and it asks you to explain your answer, that's something I would want. Because of the converse of Pythagorean theorem, since the left-hand side equals the right-hand side, it's a right triangle. Alright. Very quickly, I want you to try this last one on your own. So once again, you're being asked, is it a right triangle? You're not given a picture this time, but that's okay. Your largest side is your C, or your hypotenuse. So once again, ask yourself, does a squared plus b squared equal c squared? If it does, it's a right triangle. If it doesn't, it's not. And then we'll be done. Alright, is this your right triangle? No. Alright. So you should have 40 squared plus 11 squared, or vice versa. What matters is that 41 is on the side by itself. Okay, because that's the largest side, which is my hypotenuse. So that is, let's see, 1600 plus 121. What's 41 squared? 1681. So let's see, that is 1721, which does not equal 1681. So because the left-hand side does not equal the right-hand side, you would say, no, not a right triangle. And if you were asked to explain, you could say, since a squared plus b squared does not equal c squared, this thing's not a right triangle. Okay? And that's today and tomorrow. Any questions? Alright, your homework is on Delta Math. You will need scratch. For the triangle inequality theorem, I'm not too concerned about your scratch, it's just adding. But you'll definitely need it for Pythagorean theorem. And we might do like a little activity or something tomorrow. I haven't quite decided. But we're not moving on, just because I'm assuming if you're here today, you're going to be here tomorrow, but I don't know how my other classes are going to look. I was honestly expecting all of y'all to be out, but that's okay. I'm glad y'all are here. But yeah, that is it for today and Friday. Our homework's a little longer than normal just because it's covering today and tomorrow. Okay, so you have today to work on it. I would honestly get it done today. And then tomorrow we can once again talk about your grade. A lot of you weren't here last Friday. Did not talk about your grade, so we can talk about that then. Okay?